وجنات ألفافا إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله الكريم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
تفضلوا استريحوا. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: ولا تلبسوا الحق بالباطل وتكتموا الحق وأنتم تعلمون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse in the Holy Quran, He said, do not put the garb of falsehood on what is right, and do not hide what is true, and you know that it's true. That many people, what they do is they hide the truth, and they know what the truth is, but it doesn't meet their purposes or their ends. The first thing that comes to mind is a narration that was narrated of Amir al-Mu'mineen in the Battle of Jamal, or shortly after the Battle of Jamal. Many of these incidents happened where people came because this was one of the greatest fitan, upheavals, and trials that happened in Islamic history. The reason being, this is one that was outside of the Medina, and therefore the people knew about it. You see, this thing had happened before. Recently we passed by the remembrance of the martyrdom of Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha. This had happened in the Medina. The difference is they were able to control the information that was leaving the Medina. That nobody was able to let that information come out, and this is why we didn't hear about it or know about it till a long time later. So historians always come back to the Battle of Jamal and say the Battle of Jamal, this was the biggest upheaval that happened in Islam. They call this the first civil war in Islam. They call this the first time that so many companions were killing one another. And so people were unsure of what the truth was. And how could they know that this was the truth? So a man by the name of Harith ibn al-Hut al-Laythi. He came to Amir al-Mu'mineen and he said to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, ما أرى طلحة والزبير وعائشة احتجوا إلا على الحق. He says, I have never seen the likes of Talha, Zubair and Aisha take a stance except it's on something that is true. فأمير المؤمنين says to him, سلام الله عليه, he says, يا حارث إنك إن نظرت تحتك ولم تنظر فوقك جزت عن الحق. That if you look at what is beneath you, but you don't look what is above you, then you will lose sight of the truth. Now what the Imam is telling him here is make sure you have a comprehensive view of what's happening. You look at every angle and then see if what you're seeing is right or wrong. Not just simply by looking at who the personalities are that are there. Because don't forget, they went under the banner of what? They used the classical soundbite. The problem is for us, historically and scientifically, everything that came out of the Islamic world, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, everything that came out of the Islamic world was just whitewashed. It was westwashed. So everything came out of the Islamic world didn't exist. They say, oh, the father of psychology, Sigmund Freud. The father of propaganda, Edward Bernays. And anyone else, they just forget. And we'll get to that later on. And this is, you're talking about 1800s, 1900s. So it's much later on. What was happening before then? Did they not have these things? They did. The whole banner was, you're either with al-Mu'mineen or you're not. So, wow, al-Mu'mineen, yes, the Quran says that the wives of the Prophet are al-Mu'mineen. This is your mother. Do you not respect your mother? Do you not want to defend your mother? And so the people were like, oh my God, what do we do? There's the cousin of the Prophet, but then there's my mother. I have to stand with my mother. And this is why the Muslims, they fell into this upheaval. So the Imam told him, if you just look down and you don't, what's beneath you, and you don't look at what's above you, then you will pass away from the haqq. And he says, إِنَّ الْحَقِّ وَالْبَاطِلِ لَا يُعْرَفَانِ بِالنَّاسِ. He says, truth and falsehood are not known by people. That they are not attached by people. They are not exclusive to any people. They cannot be monopolized by any people. This is important. So the Imam says, don't look at personalities or people. Don't look at the garb that somebody is wearing, for example, that this guy must be a good person because of the garb that he's wearing. Sometimes someone dressed as a police officer is not a police officer. And sometimes somebody that's dressed as a sheikh is not a sheikh, has no knowledge. And sometimes so on and so forth. So we don't take what people's appearances are. In other words, you don't judge a book by its cover. And then he says, وَلَكِنْ أَعْرِفِ الْحَقِّ بِإِتِّبَاعِ مَنِ اتَّبَعَ وَالْبَاطِلِ بِاجْتِنَابِ مَنِ اجْتَنَبَ. Or in another one he says, أَعْرِفِ الْحَقِّ تَعْرِفْ أَهْلَهُ وَأَعْرِفِ الْبَاطِلِ تَعْرِفْ أَهْلَهُ. Know the truth. In other words, use the truth as the criterion. And use the falsehood as the criterion. So when it comes to something like this and someone says, this is Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, you tell them this is Qasim al-Jannati wal-Nar. About Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi alayhi. That it's clear, the Prophet was so clear about this. In fact, he gave examples because he is a Prophet. He prophesies, he tells you what is to happen in the future and where to stand. He says, if all of the people gather in a valley and Ali is in a valley, then follow the valley that Ali is in. Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. This is one of the great discords that happens in Islamic history, and we take this lesson. But the question is, or I'm sure many may beg the question, that why are we speaking about events from 1,000 years ago? Why are we speaking about something that's so distant from where we are? What can we possibly get from this? If I read about this and learn about this, will I know if a nuclear war is going to be triggered or if World War III has already begun or it hasn't? Will I know who and how the Illuminati are and how they're going to end the world? Will I know if I should listen to the people who run pharmaceuticals and the pharmaceutical complex? This is important. These are important questions. People tell you, I want to hear about what's contemporary. You're telling me about what Imam Ali alayhi salam said X amount of years ago. Where does this fit now? In no sociological or psychological book do they sit there and have the main meat of the knowledge that is within it saying this is the teachings of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Or this is the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So why do we bring this distance, this history that is so distant from our contemporary time by the barrier of time to learn about how we can find out and know the truth? So we begin to look at a very important concept. And this concept is the whole concept of critical thought. And critical thought has been a buzzword for the last 10 years, where they speak about this is important, we need to educate our children, we need to educate the people to be people who have critical thought. This is what Imam Ali alayhi salam was speaking about when he said, if you look beneath you, you will not see what is above you. That you need to have a clear vision of every angle before you make your decision. And so when we look at critical thought, one of the most important things we need to look at is the multiple perspectives, and we need to look at who is being silenced, who is not being spoken about, who is somebody that is not being allowed to say what needs to be said. This gives you a good idea of how we learn or find out the truth. That in every story and every narrative, somebody is silenced. Somebody is, we're not going to talk about this, we're just going to frame it in a certain perspective. al-Mu'mineen, all right? They say to him, al-Hikm, they say, al-Hukm lillah, la laka ya Ali, right? La hukma illa lillah. This is what the Khawarij was saying, that there is no authority but Allah. You cannot be the Khalif, Muawiyah cannot be the Khalif. And so people ran with this, to the point that in the Battle of Siffin, as you all know, they held up the Qara'in on the spears, right? So they got the Quran and they put it on multiple spears. The question is, when you look at it historically, did they have that many written copies of the Quran? There was no printing press. So what they actually did is they just had pieces of timber and somebody wrote Quran on the front and they put it on a spear. It wasn't even a book. So they had these pieces of timber held up on spears saying, we want the Quran to judge between Amir al-Mu'mineen and us. We want to go by the Quran. They take that one phrase and they run. Now when you see this, who is being silenced? The Holy Prophet is being silenced. The messenger of the successor of the Prophet and the message of the Prophet, Ali ibn Abi Talib salamullah alayhi, is being silenced by them saying that the Quran is what is going to judge between us. When you say the Quran, what do you mean by the Quran? The Quran meaning your interpretation of the Quran? The Quran as in the revelation that came down from the Holy Prophet? Or is the Quran what you are claiming is the Quran? And this is what's going to judge between us. And so, we look at it in a modern context. One of the most prestigious prizes that you can receive in the modern world is the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize is a prize that people get for achievements in all degrees of humanities and sciences. One of the most prominent ones is the Nobel Peace Prize. This was founded by a guy called Alfred Nobel, who they claim invented dynamite. Nitroglyceride, he made it a little bit safer, and then they were able to use it in explosives. Now, the reality is, this guy didn't even invent it, lo and behold. So it was another guy called Asanio Sobrero. So Asanio Sobrero worked in the same lab that Alfred Nobel worked in. It was the Paluzzi lab in Paris. And he had been working on it, but he said, this is too dangerous. So all of a sudden, Alfred Nobel leaves, takes the idea with him, and he starts working on it in his own lab. He gets a factory, and he starts making explosives. During this time, while he's making his little explosions, he kills his own brother in one of the explosions. And he kills many of the workers that were with him. But he begins to sell this explosive that's better than black gunpowder. And it's later used as the model, even the way the detonation caps are made to be, you know, the main way that they operate with modern day shaped explosives, plastic explosives and things like that. And so when this guy makes so much money, he then begins this foundation called the Nobel Foundation, and this Nobel Foundation decides who brings forth good things to humanity and who doesn't. And they give them a prize and they give them $1 million. So you look at this from far and you say, this is such a brilliant idea. This makes people, encourages people to advance. Look at the guy who founded it. The guy who founded it, I don't know, I can't say with certainty, but it seems like he stole the idea of someone else and patented it. So he took this idea, he patented it, and then he ended up killing his brother. He killed I don't know how many factory workers. Surely there was no work cover in 1860, whatever, when he did it, 1867 or so. And then eventually we begin to see who are the people that are winning this prize. Gives you an idea. You have to start thinking about war criminals, Hassan. The people that are winning these prizes are criminals and thieves. You begin to go back in history and have a look. Some people even refuse to accept it. One of the commanders of the Viet Cong refused to accept it because they were giving the peace prize to Henry Kissinger. Like Henry Kissinger, this is like a modern day Al-Hajjaj, you know. Henry Kissinger, he refused because he says, if Henry Kissinger is getting the peace prize, I don't want the peace prize. $1 million or not, keep your $1 million. But we look most recently, and if we quickly go through this, the guy who received it most recently, two guys, Ales Bilyatsky and Dmitry Muratov. Both of these are Russian names, if you didn't guess. 2022 and 2021. Both of these Russians that received the Nobel Peace Prize are journalists that are anti-government in Russia. And they're very pro-Ukraine. And one of them, I think Dmitry Muratov, actually auctioned off his Nobel Peace Prize, and someone ended up buying it for $103 million, 103.5, which is a fraction of the amount that is being obviously donated to or given to Ukraine to bolster the war effort. But these two guys, of all the people on earth, these are the two guys that they found that deserved the Peace Prize. Unbelievable. Because they're both anti-Russian journalists, and these people, they fought for freedom of expression. This same Western civilization, who has imprisoned the likes of Julian Assange without charge, just rotting in some jail in isolation. The same sort, and this is someone that's of them, yani. Someone that wouldn't allow Edward Snowden as a whistleblower to ever leave or go back to his motherland, to the US, to see his family or his parents. These are the people that are getting the Peace Prize. Before them, in 2021, Maria Ressa, a member of the queer community. And before that, in 2019, Abiy Ahmed. Abiy Ahmed is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia and someone who is responsible for the Tigray massacre you keep hearing about on social media. This guy gets a Peace Prize. A guy that is wanted completely for war crimes. And the more you go back, all you see is criminal after criminal getting a prize for peace. If this is not libas al-haq bil-batil, if this is not placing the garb of falsehood over something that is true, and knowing what is true, so they know that truthfully this guy is a criminal, but I'm going to call him a peacemaker. This is the issue here. When the Imam salawatullahi alayhi, he gives us this principle, it's a principle that it's eternal. Why? It's because where does the principle come from? You know, when you study any field of science or any field of humanities, you basically get sources that are peer-reviewed. So other scientists have looked at it and said, yep, this sounds correct. We can reproduce this experiment and get the same results. So you can use this. But they never allow you to ask the true question that, where did this guy get it from? Sometimes they do. At the bottom of the paper, they say, all right, we were funded by so-and-so. There are some conflict of interests. My wife owns the lab or whatever. They write it at the bottom. But a lot of the time, for the real research that comes out, the stuff that who reads that research? It's the people that are researchers, that are scientists, that are professionals. Everyone else like me reads it off the news. I just get the headline, COVID causes headaches. Thank you. COVID no longer causes headaches. Thank you. Climate change is now causing headaches. And you just accept it, you know? If you want to have a happier marriage, take the 4th booster. Anyway, so, and they reiterate these things to us. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, this divine message, there's a verse in Surah Al-Rum where he says, أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا في أنفسهم ما خلق الله السماوات والأرض وما بينهما إلا بالحق وأجل مسمى وإن كثيرا من الناس بلقاء ربهم لكافرون. He says, do they not contemplate? Do they not contemplate and think within themselves that Allah created the heavens and the earth and what is between them with righteousness and with right? And it has a period of time where it will perish and finish. And the majority of people, or a lot of people, with the meeting of their Lord, are in disbelief. They don't believe that this is going to happen. The importance of having this thought and this idea is that we need to look at how do we connect all of this back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the message of the prophets, the message of the imams. This is what's important. That I'm going to come and tell them, look, there's the Imam al-Hujjah al-Faraj al-Sharif. They're going to say, oh, what are you talking about? World War III. Tell them there's a prophet that came 1400 years ago and was saying so-and-so. Are they going to listen? So you come back and you say, let's have some serious discussions and serious thought about any science or any knowledge that you want to think about. If you look at any science, they tell you all the details. For example, they'll tell us about the solar system. They'll tell us about the cells within our body with details, down to the atom, down to the quark and the quasar, down to the subatomic materials that are within it, the way that it functions, the way that it reacts to certain things. They'll tell us we can use certain experiments, but some questions you're not allowed to ask. Questions like, why is it there? And who placed it there? They tell us it's a big bang and it's an ever-expanding mass. But if we rewind it and it's back to a single point, I say, where did it come from? I say, no, we start with the point exploding. That's it. That's where it begins. Could you imagine? Imagine that you want to go and find out or investigate an explosion, and you tell them, all right, we need to find out who put it there. They say, no. We start at the explosion. Start investigating from the explosion. Would it work? Would you ever come back with a solution? Never. With every other science, it's the same thing, and I'll tell you why. All of these experiments use reference points and constants. We need these constants for our science to be sound. If those constants disappear, like for example, let's say we're doing any physical experimentation, if there's no constant of gravity, could we get the same result? Could it be reproduced if gravity is 6.8 today and tomorrow it's 12.2 newtons? Impossible. You will never get the same results. You wouldn't be able to maintain anything. If other things, for example, let's say water change, that today it stays at a liquid form between above 0 degrees, between 0 and 100 it's in liquid form. Tomorrow it's between 0 and 65. What would happen? What would happen to everything that we have in the world? It wouldn't stay. Someone or something, some being is maintaining that this stays correct and these constants remain, and this is how we have that ability to understand and move forward with science. Now, taking this thought and keeping this thought without going into further detail of this thought, but it's important. How do we track it back to the source? There's hadith al-Halilaj. Hadith al-Halilaj is a hadith about, it's a long narration. If you have the time to read it, it's about 20 pages. It's translated into English. You can find it online. It's fantastic. Somebody writes a letter to Imam al-Sadiq and tells him, I want a answer or some sort of written work where I can use this to argue with the atheists. And so he gives him this long discussion. Part of this discussion, he speaks with a physician, so basically a doctor from India. And they sit down and they speak about certain things. Now the Imam brings up a concept. He says to him, do you think that the scientist, when he experiments with different elements to reach a certain medicine and tells you, look, there's a certain leaf that you get from the east of the world and a grain that you get from the west, and if you mix these two together, or their chemical component for that matter, you will get a certain medicine. He says, do you think that he went and tested every single one to come and get to this conclusion? We're talking about medicine from 1400 years ago, or even medicine today. How did they come up with these conclusions? With all of these different things. Now, obviously, there's a body of knowledge. But back then, obviously, whoever learnt it, it had to come from a teacher. And that teacher had a teacher. وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. It says in the Holy Quran. Every knowledge comes from a teacher, and so on and so forth, until it gets back to who? Do you know Jabir ibn Hayyan? There was a guy who did a thesis in the University of Berlin about Jabir ibn Hayyan, the father of chemistry, the student of Imam al-Sadiq. So they said, where he says in his book, Allamani Ja'far ibn Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. But where did he get that knowledge from? Where did Imam al-Sadiq get that knowledge from? So they looked and they said, Imam al-Sadiq got it off Imam al-Baqir. And where did Imam al-Baqir get it from? So on and so forth, all the way to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Al-Nabi al-Ummi. If we accept that the Prophet was illiterate, at minimum, we accept that the Prophet was unlettered, that no one educated him, no one taught him. Where did the Prophet get these sciences from? The knowledge of chemistry right now, which is the backbone of nearly every science that we have, chemistry is the study of matter. So these things, where did they come from? From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you see where I'm heading? You look into any science and any field and you run back, you say this is a teacher upon a teacher upon a teacher. It ends up who? With Muhammad wa al-Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I would like you to put some research into this and have a look, and you will see that most certainly, you look at go look at, for example, the sciences of sociology, a lot of the sciences of the humanities, of medicine, of architecture, or of construction. These sciences, if you see where they came from, it's not possible that some guy in 1793 just decided, you know what, this is what the periodic table of elements is going to look like. Even that guy stole it off another guy who stole it off another guy. And then where did he get it from? This is the thing. And why is it that when we look at chemistry, it all goes back to Jabir ibn Hayyan, for example. Every knowledge has a teacher and it goes back and back all the way to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. That this knowledge came from the prophets and the prophets passed it down. And then with that corpus of knowledge, we built onto it. We got those ideas. But from everything, there was a point in history where this moved forward. So for me, to understand and get to know the truth, the Ahl al-Bayt tell us that whatever knowledge you look for, sharrika, gharriba, go east, go west, you will not find knowledge that is beneficial to you illa anna, except it's from us. Why? These are the inheritors of the corpus of knowledge from Nabi Adam all the way down. I do not want to take too much of your time. Inshallah, there's another 2 points that I want to cover, but I might not cover both. The next one, knowing is not only known by gaining knowledge. When I want to know the truth, it's not just known by gaining knowledge and gathering particular evidence, although this is important. This is important. But to reach degrees in ma'rifah, this is something else altogether. So for example, I may understand, like there's a scholar in Simon Fraser University in Canada, British Columbia, Maya Yazigi. Maya Yazigi, she studies Islam. Her works and her essays on Islam, fantastic. Historically, very accurate. In that sense. You read them and say, well, if I didn't know any better, I'd think she was Shia. But she argues both points. I think that this is someone that understands Imam Ali than most Shia understand better than they do in that sense. Yet she doesn't believe that Imam Ali alayhi salam was divinely appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the Khalif. She doesn't have that belief. She lacks that ma'rifah. She lacks that understanding. So she has that knowledge, but not all knowledge comes through learning. Some knowledge, we have in that hadith that says, al-ilmu nur, yaqdhifuhu Allah fi qalbi man yasha. That knowledge is a light that Allah places or shoots into the heart of whomsoever He pleases. There's another hadith that says, man akhlasa lil haqq fima yaqul wa yaf'al allamahu Allah bila ta'allum. That whoever is sincere with doing right and saying right, then Allah teaches him without him attaining knowledge. Sometimes that knowledge comes through ilham. Sometimes that knowledge is like the knowledge of, for example, the ma'rifah of Imam al-Hussein salawatullahi alayhi. The love of Imam al-Hussein people go and visit Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. But you put it logically on paper, why do I even want to go to Iraq again? Please remind me. All right? Why would I, for example, want to walk from Najaf to Karbala when I could easily just enter a bus or a taxi? Right? Why? And you say, oh, you don't have to do this religiously. Oh, really? Okay, then. But the people that have that ma'rifah of the Imam salawatullahi alayhi, they look at it differently. They look at it differently. Why? They have an understanding. So, for example, somebody could know, I could tell you the details. Oh, this is what the Shia believe. Fatima al-Zahra salawatullahi alayha, she came from the fruit of a tree. And then the Prophet ascended to paradise, ate from that fruit of the tree. And then he went and he consummated his marriage, so on and so forth. The whole story. Fatima salawatullahi alayha would speak to her mother, Sayyidah Khadija, while she was in the womb. Even with all that knowledge that they have accepted and taken, it still may not give them understanding. How? How? Because you see it in the action that comes from it. I tell you, I'm a follower of Imam Ali. I love Imam Ali to death, yet I can't lie straight in bed. An honest word doesn't come out of my mouth. I don't keep a single promise. Where's the ma'rifah of Imam Ali alayhi salam? If you say that I know all of these things and I understand the status of Imam Ali alayhi salam, but you can't say an honest word, where's that ma'rifah? Or you say, for example, I understand Allah, I can tell you about the philosophical attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I have nothing when it comes to the time to fall into sin, I dive into that sin. Where's that ma'rifah? Ma'rifah is a lot like khushu'. Khushu', humility from fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, isn't a voluntary action. I don't just stand up and say, I'm going to do a salat khashi'ah. It's not a voluntary action. It's not something I choose to do. It's something that when I begin to understand the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I begin to have a fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that involuntary fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows me to act in a certain manner. The Holy Prophet says, Al-ilmu nur wa dhiya yaqdhifuhu Allah fi qulub awliyaihi wa nataqa bihi ala lisanihim. That knowledge is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places into the hearts of His near ones, the guardians, the people who are near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Ahlul Bayt, the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He places this within their heart, He then allows them to say things on their tongue. As we know in the famous story of Husham, the companion of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when he remember the story about when he proves imamat to the Imam of Masjid al-Basra. But I want to mention another story that's connected with this hadith, inshallah, that will give us just a small idea about Sheikh Ja'far Kashf al-Ghita. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one day, Sheikh Ja'far Kashf al-Ghita, it's narrated that he gets visited by a Sunni scholar. And that Sunni scholar visits him. And this was a common thing. This was a normal thing. The Sunni and the Shia scholars would meet and they would argue. And they would put both ideas, have academic discussions about their beliefs, and go back without killing each other or anything like that. SubhanAllah. This is something, again, this is another thing that's really been, and it's something that's rather recent. And there was a period where certain things happened at the time of the Imam salawatullah alayhim, and then there was a period where it was relatively in the Islamic world, this was something normal. Like look up World War II, for example. You know, the West was slaughtering each other in the garden they call Europe, and the rest of the world's a jungle. And in the rest of the world, the jungle, people were just chilling, eating figs and olives, while these people were, causing mass genocide. Mass genocides. And so he comes up to Sheikh Ja'far Kashf al-Ghita, and he says to him that I agree as a Sunni, Sheikh al-Alusi, he says to him, I agree that Imam Ali alayhi salam is the rightful Khalif. And we accept he was the fourth Khalif. I don't know why you Shia are so upset. We accept he's the fourth Khalif. What evidence do you have that just because he's the Khalif, no one can be the Khalif before him? He's not the first, he's the second, not the second, he's the fourth. So what? So Sheikh Ja'far looks at him and he says to him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it in the Holy Quran. And so Sheikh Al-Alusi says, where is this in the Holy Quran? He says to him, Surah At-Tawbah, verse 120, ما كان لأهل المدينة ومن حولهم من الأعراب أن يتخلفوا عن رسول الله ولا يرغبوا بأنفسهم عن نفسه. So he says, Allah says in the Holy Quran that it is not befitting of the people of Medina and the people that are around the Medina, yani the Arabian Peninsula, to take the position of the Prophet or want the position of the Prophet for themselves other than his self. So he says to him, or to turn back off from his word, yani, that when the Prophet departs, this verse in Surah At-Tawbah, he says that the interesting thing is that in verse 120, he says, وَلَا يَرْغَبُوا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ. He says that the pronoun nafs, generally, in Arabic, is not used unless it's referring to somebody else. So when it says here, he talks about عَنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ وَلَا يَرْغَبُوا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ, and they do not try and take or want for themselves, all right, what is for his self. You wouldn't say for his self, you'd say what is for him. Or in Arabic, you would say who, for example, عن رسول الله ولا يرغبوا بأنفسهم عنه. That's it, finished. So you'd use the pronoun ha, who. But instead, what they've used, the pronoun nafsihi. Nafsihi means it's referring to somebody else. So Al-Alusi thinks about it and he says, yeah, this is correct. Otherwise, in Arabic, it's incorrect if he's not referring to a second person. So he's saying that the people of Medina have no right to take the position or want what the Prophet has set for himself, himself being a pronoun for somebody else. So he flips it over in his mind and he says what he has said is correct, that it is speaking about somebody else. So he says, okay, I concede. In Arabic grammar, they're speaking about someone else. Who's that? Nafsihi. He says this is also in the Quran, and he refers him to Ayat al-Mubahala. When he says, تعالوا ندعو أنفسنا وأنفسكم. Call out صلى على محمد وآل محمد. And he says the nafs in this verse is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Just like the nafs in verse 120 is Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. So when Sheikh Al-Alusi leaves, Sheikh Ja'far Kashf al-Ghita comes and sits down with his students and they tell him, Sheikh, now we've studied for years, you've never told us this verse. This is amazing. It's like we've never heard it. As Sheikh Al-Alusi said, it's like I've never read this verse in the Holy Quran, Surah 120 and Surah At-Tawbah. Sheikh Ja'far Kashf al-Ghita says to him, and I had never thought of it before this moment. When he asked the question, it just came into my head. That all of a sudden I thought, this is a good answer for this. This happens. Now one of the brothers was telling me that he had a story, inshallah, and we'll finish with this because I've taken much of your time. We're on about 40 minutes, I think. Is that right? Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So there was a brother, and he doesn't know that much about Islam. And all his friends that he grew up with were Ahlul Sunnah. And he said they were fantastic. We were like brothers. He says, all of a sudden, one of my friends, he sort of gravitated towards, after the Syria incident and all this stuff, he started gravitating towards Salafism. He said he became a Salafi, grew the long beard, the short skirt, the short dashdashi. And then he came to his friend and he said to him, look, I just want to tell you something because I love you as a brother, to the Shia. He says to him, I love you as a brother and I don't want you to burn in hell. But stop being, a Shia kafir. What you do is kufr. He said, how do I do kufr? He said, you idolize Imam Ali, alayhi salam. Obviously he didn't say that. He said, you idolize Ali ibn Abi Talib. So he said, he told me that and I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to say to him. He said, then I just had an idea. I said, He said to him, why do you shave your mustache? So he said, because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says, and why do you grow such a big beard? He says, because Rasulullah grew a big beard. And why do you wear a short dashdash? He says, Rasulullah wore a short dashdash. He says, well, you're idolizing Rasulullah. Telling me I'm idolizing Imam Ali. It was a simple answer, short answer, but this is it. This, and it's by idolizing doesn't mean more than following and taking as a role model. Idolizing, following and taking. This is the way he understood it. This is the way he responded to it. In conclusion, we need to have an open mind in understanding the truth and use these principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. That they sent us these principles to understand and look for what is true regardless of who's with the truth. And keep away from falsehood regardless of who's standing with the falsehood. Not just because it's my guy that's the thief, I'm going to stand with him. Or it's because my son that committed the assault, I'm going to stand by his side because it's my son. No, the truth is the truth. Because in the modern day, this is what we have. My God, did you see what happened with Andrew Tate? He's a Muslim now. And all of a sudden, this is unbelievable. Did you see what happened with Jordan Peterson? He said something about Islam. 2 weeks later, he's entering Masjid al-Aqsa. And he's going to a usurped land, has no right to be there, walks in. Unbelievable. Somewhere where their human rights record is deplorable. And these sorts of people that people see on the internet, and they follow them, these influencers, people get influenced by them. People that don't have لم يستضيئوا بنور العلم فيهتدون ولم يلجأوا إلى ركن وثيق فينجون. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says that because they have no light of guidance to follow, which is Muhammad wa al Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Nor do they have a solid foundation. And things change when they want it to change. I just want to finish with this last point that's really important. To show you how when somebody doesn't have that faith, with our faith, we have the truth is the truth. It doesn't matter where it came from or who said it. If it's a true thing, it is a true thing. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam proved his prophethood. This is what is correct. And this is what we follow. But if somebody, for example, comes and says, oh, I'm married to the Imam al-Mahdi's daughter, it's clear. You come and speak to him within a few questions, if you can be bothered wasting your time with that sort of person, you would see that this is somebody that's acting on falsehood, but I say, hold on a minute, this guy's from my village. I know him well. Perhaps what he's saying is true. This is a problem. That I accept him on his word because I have some relation to him or some friendship to him. Do not be fooled by false titles. Don't be fooled by false titles. Don't be fooled by, don't be surprised if the World Cup is in Saudi Arabia in 4 years' time, the next World Cup. Because these things, they don't care about human rights, even though this is the whole theme of what's happening in Qatar right now is human rights, is it not? Like, oh my God, they can't speak the truth. They can't, and in Israel, they're just burning Palestinians. They're beating them up. They're beating up Israelis that stand with, for example, in the massacre that's happening in Tigray, the executions that happened in Saudi Arabia, the people who are imprisoned and are going to be executed in Bahrain. In all of these countries, what they deem to be human rights is what they deem. And I just want to tell you one story. It's a contemporary story, but something just to keep in your mind to see what their idea is. But when we come back, we say, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a prophet called Lut. And when these people disobeyed, he actually lifted the whole city into the sky, flipped it and threw it back down and then rained upon it with hellfire. That's it. That's my conclusion for this. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it's not allowed, it's not allowed. Finished. And all of these 124,000 prophets that went through all this pain and punishment and torture to bring me this message in a book, and then I'll say, you know what? I'm still unsure. Imagine that. I'm still not really sure. It reminds me of a different example, but perhaps one I shouldn't use. After all of the effort, just imagine that. And these guys, this is what they do. They put haqq bil batil wal batil bil haqq. Let me give you an example. Do you know if anybody You go to school tomorrow, or you go to work tomorrow and say, look, not even, go out for smoko and come back inside and say, you know what, I feel like a female right now. No one has the right to tell him otherwise. In fact, in a state like Victoria, it's actually illegal to try and put someone through some sort of therapy to bring them back to the lighter side, to bring them back to our team. You're not allowed, it's illegal. You can go to jail if you take someone to do that. But watch this, you're not allowed to even say that someone isn't. I can't tell someone that if a man tells me I feel like I'm a woman today, I can't tell him, look, you're not. It's obvious that you're not. The beard and everything. It's not happening. In the United States of America, the recent shooting in Colorado, and I'll finish with this, sorry, but it's important, I think, the concept. A person went into a rainbow bar and he started killing people. He shot 5 people. While he was shooting, they tackled him, they took the gun off him, and they bashed him up. And they arrested him. The guy went to court, and when he went to court, he told them, I identify as non-binary. Okay? And the guy, he just looks like someone that fell out of a trailer, in the central states of the US. Clearly it doesn't look it, but it doesn't matter. According to their laws, if somebody feels that they're non-binary, and he says, and I want to be called them and they. So CNN and the main news anchors, they got so upset with this. They said, how dare he do this? We cannot accept that he is that. So they started bringing experts, like transsexual people, experts online, saying, I looked at his face and he doesn't look like he is non-binary. I can tell by looking at it, subhanAllah. For the last 10 years, we were not allowed. That if biologically the guy's a male, we're not allowed to say otherwise. For 10 years, and then all of a sudden with this court case, the issue is this. For them, there is no haqq and batil. They call it what they want to call it. When they want to call it terrorism, it's like when that guy came, he said, he was an Israeli, Zionist. He said, and they printed it in every news outlet. Could you imagine this was printed about any other race? He says, unfortunately, not all terrorists are Muslim, but all Muslims are terrorists. La ilaha illallah. And they printed it, everyone said, this is wisdom. People were making memes out of it. Allahu Akbar. Imagine you had said that. No, unfortunately, not all Jews are Zionist terrorists, but all terrorists are Zionist Jews, for example. That would be like, this is anti-Semitism. If I was in Germany, I'd be arrested now for saying something like that, even as a proposal. This is what basically they've done in this. They have taken anything that they want to be truth and they label it with whatever word for it to be truth, or whatever features for it to be their version of truth, or their version of truth or truth. Like, and exactly the same as the father of propaganda in Islam, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. This guy, he's the one that came up with these things, saying he's the uncle of the believers and all the rest that we saw. The issue is when somebody has a strong foundation and basis and connection with Allah, the Holy Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, these infallibles that have that message, you're not going to fall to that. We know what oppression is. We beat our chests and cry over it every day. We know exactly what oppression is. We've tasted oppression, and this is what we see and we view and understand what the haqq is and what the batil is, and how to keep away from this and understand and be knowledgeable of the truth is to not get caught up in this whirlwind and allow their definitions to succeed. The definitions have been defined by Allah, His Prophet, and His Ahlul Bayt. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of our holy Imam Al-Jaafaria al-Sharif. We ask Allah to have mercy on our dead, to cure our sick, to protect us against our lower selves in the same way that He protects the righteous against their lower selves. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم كن لوليك الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه وفي كل وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين، وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات وقضاء الحوائج وقبول الأعمال. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. صلى الله عليه وسلم.